Should I move to a monastery? This is a question I get a lot. Someone hit me up on Instagram the other day with a message asking that question. I get that email a lot. I get Facebook messages. I get comments on YouTube. People feel fed up with, they've reached a certain saturation point with the tragedies, traumas, and dramas, and more often than not, just the miserable daily grind of regular human life, job, family, relationships, and something clicks in them. And they want to know if they should leave it all behind and go up to the mountaintop and start over, start clean, begin their full-time spiritual path. Okay, so today I want to address that question a little bit. And I want to talk about there are three ways you can throw it all away and go to a monastery. I want to discuss those three ways. I want to talk about how you wind up at a monastery in the first place. We could say this is the conversation around karma. So I'm going to unpack that a little bit. And then I'm going to talk about monastic cautionary tales. And after that, we're going to bring everything full circle back to you in your everyday normal life, not at a monastery. Okay, I'm not sure if we're actually going to do all that because I never stick according to plan on these videos, but let's see what happens. First of all, it's not so easy, you may have noticed, to find a spiritual institution, let's say in North America or Europe where I live, not so easy to find an institution devoted exclusively to spiritual training. I used to live in Los Angeles. Go to a street corner and swing a cat, which you shouldn't do. You shouldn't be swinging cats, but if you were to swing a cat on a street corner and let it go, you would hit 5 meditation studios, all of them for profit. So most of the spiritual organizations that you're going to find have some version of a full-time staff, small or large, depending on where you are. And then mostly they are catering in one way or another to the public. So this idea that there's like a place where you can go, an ashram or a monastery, be it a Russian Orthodox Christian type monastery or a Rinzai Zen Buddhist Kyoto Japan style monastery, those are actually hard to find. So chances are what we're talking about realistically is you become a full-time student somewhere. And that means you clean toilets so rich people can come and take a retreat on tantric wellness for a weekend. So just so you know, and that's a theme I'd like to bring up right at the beginning of this video here, is illusions, fantasies, and ideals about the monastic path. Let's keep that in mind as we move through this video. Okay, so let's say you found a larger Zen center. It's run by a priest who lives there full time. He's got a couple monks or whatever, and you're thinking about moving there. Okay, well, you have 3 options. You can do a weekend retreat or a zazenkai. So you can move there for a weekend, right? And do a retreat. You can do a longer Dai-Sesshin 7-day retreat, or like a Seichu training period, which is a summer training, or a winter Seichu period, which is winter training. And then for the third option, you can move to the place and stay there indefinitely. Okay, for the first 2 options, I would recommend, first of all, yes, do this. It's a great way to explode your practice, to explode your brain. It's almost, it reminds me of skydiving, okay? So I used to skydive, right? And I did it for a full summer. And I would work really hard at the day at my dad's factory. and I'd be working a forklift and lifting thousands of pounds of metal and drilling the metal, and I'd be exhausted at the end of the day. And my dad, who was a skydiver at the time, was like, all right, let's go. and 20 minutes later, I would be in a tiny little 2-propeller plane flying up into the Wisconsin sky to jump out of it, right? And it was very disorienting. I'm getting to my point here about monasteries. Don't worry. Okay, so you go, the door opens on the plane, and you hear the sound of the wind rushing by, and you look out the open door, and then you jump. Now something happens. Your leg, my left leg, for some reason, it's usually the dominant leg, so maybe it was my right leg, but I think it was my left leg. My left leg would go down just automatically. You're supposed to fly a certain way, so you put your chest forward, your neck back, etc. You're supposed to go like this, but when you first jump out, you have to get your balance, and your leg reaches, and it's intuitively doing this because it's looking for Earth. You're not supposed to be falling through the sky. It's looking for Earth, and then it doesn't find it. And now you gotta learn how to fly again, and you're flying through the sky. When you go do a weekend retreat, or a week-long retreat, or a several-month retreat at a monastery, a Zen monastery, let's say, there's always that moment when you realize your comfort zone is not there. The analogy here being the foot reaching for Earth when you jump out of an airplane. It's not there. And now you have to practice. Now you have to practice in the same way the skydiver now has to fly. So the ground is, in some sense, always snatched out from under you when you go do monastic training. Even if you just go to your Zen center for one evening, when you bow and enter that zendo, the human world, the ground of reality, civilization, which we all agree to abide by, is in some sense taken from you. And now you have to practice. And that's the great thing about doing any length of time, whether it's a week, a month, or much longer at a monastery, is that you have to practice. Now, when people ask me this question, should I move to a monastery? I think oftentimes they're expressing a regret. They're expressing a regret that they haven't committed more deeply to the one thing in their life that has truly given them meaning and purpose. They feel like they didn't have the courage or the guts or the luck to be able to commit themselves to the only thing that truly matters. So I feel like there's always often a flavor of regret and introspection to the question. I don't know why we wind up in the situations we wind up in the lives that we have, why we're in the shoes we're in. I'm in Europe, so I wear sandals indoors. Why and how? But the older I get and the more seasoned I become as a human being, I start to think that a person's only job is to be really, really good at doing their own life. And of course, from like a Zen or Buddhist perspective, this is going to mean inhabiting your life and the circumstances of your life, the relationships, the responsibilities, the circumstances, inhabiting them completely over and over and over. So your job isn't to be good at in the way that your heroes are good at stuff, or in the way that your guilt is telling you you should be good at certain things, pining for other lives, other circumstances, better circumstances. Like your job, only job in life is to be good at your life. So this is what I consider to be the teaching of karma in Buddhism. Now, I never got any specific teachings on karma. I got very few doctrinal Buddhist teachings at all as a Zen monk, which makes me a little bit ignorant on the one hand, and on the other hand, it allows me to take these teachings where I see them and apply them in my own homemade way, which is kind of what this channel is on some level. Karma to me means circumstances, but circumstances in the most meaningful sense of the word. So let me tell you what I mean by that. I remember when I was living in West Hollywood and I was working in the film industry. For those of you who have not lived in Hollywood and have not worked in the film industry, Hollywood is basically a large, lucrative, very self-absorbed, self-involved, very sunlit and well-disguised whorehouse. That's all it is. You are selling yourself over and over and over in Hollywood. And there are more sellers than buyers. I was a screenwriter, and I was always working on these stories of these young men who were going on spiritual journeys. And through my writing, I was trying to find some kind of spiritual truth. This was not a lucrative career path in Hollywood. And many were the nights when I laid on my ratty old creaky couch in my one-bedroom rent-controlled apartment on Fountain Avenue and asked myself, do you want to keep doing this? Shouldn't you be trying to live the circumstances of these characters you are unable to write because you don't know what it means to go on a spiritual path? I asked myself this over and over and over, and one night I had a vision of sorts, and I imagined selling or giving away every single item in, this is a crazy story, selling or giving away every single item in my apartment, selling my car, canceling my apartment contract. So, and then I took it further, and it was a vision of sorts. So it wasn't logical, but I was dead serious in considering this. I thought, then you will take off your shoes, you will take off your socks, you will take off your pants, your shirt, your leather wristband, or whatever accoutrement you had at the time, and you'll take off your underwear, and this will be your final act. You'll throw them out the window or whatever. You'll leave them behind in your apartment. And you will walk out the door buck freaking naked. And that is how you're going to buy your freedom. Completely giving aside all of this life that you've been unable to find traction in and starting new in the most dramatic way possible. And I was dead serious, right? So before I ever found the monastery, there was a cry from my heart over and over and over and over. Karma-wise, I was born into a family with a mother who took the spiritual path as the most important piece of her life. And she imparted that to all of her children. She was Catholic, but she gave us that religion full throttle. Now, I have a certain mental disposition, character, biology, who knows what it is. I couldn't accept that. So I rejected her Catholicism and became an ex-Catholic. But from early on, I was imbued with this taste for spirituality. Then I studied philosophy, talked about this before. So I was searching. When I was in Hollywood, I found the Diamond Way Lama Oli Nidal group, and I concentrated on my chakras or whatever nonsense they were having us do. Then I found the Shambhala tradition, and we did a very lay-focused, teachings-centered practice. I found that to be a bit stale after a while. Then I happened to be in a coffee shop one day, and I happened to find the postcard for my mentor's sitting group. He'd left them in the corner. Back in the olden days, pre-internet, you would leave your flyers in coffee shops, and I found his there, and that's how I got started on this path. When I sit there and I add up all of the things that had to go right in order for me to find the right mentor in the right city, to introduce me to the right teacher at the right monastery at the right time in my life. Don't get me started on all the string of relationships that I had had, any one of which could have resulted in an unwanted pregnancy and then a life as a dad. I mean, there were a lot of things that had to happen in order for me to set foot in 2004, I think it was, at the Mount Baldy Zen Center to lead to a 13-year life of full-time monastic practice. This is what I mean by karma. Circumstances, luck, fate, destiny, karma, circumstances. Circumstances in the most meaningful sense of the word. And this discussion of karma or circumstances always brings me back to how I opened this segment of the video. Your job, because your karma is out of your hands. Your circumstances in many ways are out of your hands. They really are. We tend to, in the West, believe in free will and meritocracy, and it gives us an incredible amount of guilt and shame, and creates competitiveness and lifestyle comparisons, status, and all that garbage that keeps a certain kind of culture and society, the wheels, gears turning in that society. But in reality, I don't think I chose to go to a monastery. There were so many micro choices along the way that could have taken me on different paths. I think somehow it was just kind of what wound up happening. It was my circumstance. And my job at the monastery would have been the exact same had my life taken me in a slightly different direction, which is to become really, really good at my life. Whatever those life circumstances are, become really, really good at them. Commit to the circumstances, take care of my responsibilities fully with awareness and consciousness, moment after moment, day after day. And when one does that, I think one's karma or circumstances ripen and change. For example, I had lived this life as a struggling creative in Hollywood for years, and I stuck to my guns. I was writing a spiritual story, many of them, and I stuck to that path. That was my life. That was what I gave myself to, was trying to figure out these characters who were going on spiritual journeys. And ultimately, that path ripened, I think, perhaps, and I met my mentor, and I went on one such path myself. What I mean when I say your job is to become really good at your life, what I don't mean necessarily is you become the best used car tire salesman at Firestone, or the really most loving husband and father to these particular kids in this particular circumstance. I don't mean that, okay? What I mean, because that's just chance. Those are just the ingredients of your life. I mean becoming really good at living life. That means doing the simple things with total awareness and commitment. So usually it means simplifying. Less busyness as much as possible, less busyness and more attention and awareness to simple tasks. Like if I could learn to walk across a room with complete and total sati, or present moment awareness, as it's called in Buddhism, I would be a Buddha. I would sprout wings and fly off to the heaven realm, right? I mean, I remember having this moment once when I was a monk, and I had come from my teacher's cabin, and I was going to the dining hall, and I was walking along like my little monk's robe, with my little monk face on. I always had this face. They used to tell me I was always like looking to not get beat up by my peers, basically, because everybody was like, when you were the head monk, everybody came at you and they wanted to make their effed up, miserable reality and problem yours. That was like their job, was to bring you this realm that was their life and to make that realm your realm, right? So I was always walking around with this self-protective, meek frown on my face. So I remember one time coming from my teacher's cabin, going to the dining hall, and I remember thinking, good Lord, have I ever just walked in my entire life once? Usually my mind is remaining back where I just came from, thinking about those circumstances or projecting forward to where I am going in projecting myself into those circumstances, or some sloppy, muddy marriage of the two. But I am never simply perambulating, putting one step in front of the other, and inhabiting this interstitial zone. And then I thought, in a larger sense, that's all life is, in a sense. It's a perambulation from birth to death. And if I can't inhabit a subspecies of that perambulation, going from my teacher's cabin to the dining hall, I'm certainly probably not doing it on a grander level. So when I say inhabiting the circumstances of your life completely, that's kind of what I mean. Not being in your head when you're washing the dishes, not being scared when the washing machine breaks down, not fortifying yourself against your peers at work as you're driving to work in the morning, but just being behind the wheel, taking a breath in that moment. We all know people who get cancer diagnoses and then all their worries drop away and they find themselves thinking, what was I worrying about? It was all leading to this moment. So that's what I mean by inhabiting the circumstances of your life, becoming really good at living your own life. And you have to do that whether you move to a monastery, whether you go to a monastery for a weekend, or whether you never wind up at a monastery ever. The practice is always the same. I mean, earlier I was talking about how when you step out of an airplane to skydive, your foot searches for earth. Well, maybe instead of a perambulation from birth to death, it's more like a leap from the airplane from birth to death. And we're always kind of free falling, right? We never really have ground beneath our feet. I mean, this is the human condition on some level. We create fake wings and we flap them in the air, but really, we're in it. We're in it, and then it's gonna stop. That's how this works. This morning I was thinking about a conversation that I had with a priest friend of mine. A mutual acquaintance spent many years in Japan training at a Zen Buddhist monastery. So this guy left his temple here to go get the real deal training in Japan. Now, this guy has, let's call him Teddy-san. Teddy-san has a truculent and combative personality. I worked with Teddy-san for many years, God bless him. He had a rough childhood with a negligent mother and a father who wasn't around. And he found in Zen Buddhism guidance and a home. And he continued that training in Japan. Came back to the States, has started up at his old temple again as the head monk there, and is the same jerk that he was before he left. He's manipulative, he's engaged in triangulation, which is to say pitting different members of the community against each other. The dude hasn't really fundamentally changed. This is what I would call a monastic cautionary tale. Step into a monastery. Swing that dead cat that you shouldn't be swinging because this is a terrible metaphor. Let that dead cat go and you're going to hit 17 monastic cautionary tales. I don't mean to diminish people's work in a monastery. I don't mean to in any way, shape, or form talk shit about monasteries. I just want to say that it hasn't been my experience that the monastery touches that part of you that that is yours and yours alone. Like you've got a bag of problems and it's got a lock on it, and only you have the combination to that lock. There's no Zen teacher that has the combination to that lock. No Buddha, no Christ. Christ doesn't have the combination to that lock. Sorry. Nobody has the combination to that lock. And only you can open up that bag of problems and live with them and live through them and live your way out of them, or however it is that that's going to happen, right? Like the monastery doesn't change that. I've seen this again and again and again. But rather than making me down on spiritual work, what it does do is make me realize I got nowhere to go but my practice right here and right now, in this moment, in whatever circumstances I find myself in. I've seen too many really laudable, commendable, enlightened or semi-enlightened people who behaved in ways that made my jaw drop. They would be rude, for example, or they would say something very stupid, or they had the most ridiculous political opinion on the planet, and you realized, this spiritual training is not a panacea. And then you realize that, again, you and you alone, within the circumstances of your life, have to do your practice, which is to say, put certain principles into practice. We could call them the principles of selflessness or self-forgetting or non-selfishness in Buddhism, the practices of compassion, and ultimately it comes down to living in the moment, or as I called it, as it's called in Buddhism, sati, present moment awareness, attention to what's happening right here and right now. And then I think that the whole world, in a sense, or your life becomes your monastery, becomes your training grounds, becomes the opportunity for you to wake up in. And there's just no other alternative. So the monastic cautionary tale is this idea that you can go up to a mountain, put yourself in very special, different circumstances, and that will finally, open up your head and let the light come in and let your light come out once and for all. I don't think it works that way. That hasn't been my experience. I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments section. And if you like this video, you can hit subscribe and hit the like, and that will help this channel out. If you want to support this channel in a bit more substantial sense in this online type sangha / monastery we got going on here, you can go to this. This is patreon.com/Shozan Jack Hobner. But you don't have to support this in that way if you don't want to. I hope your practice is going well. I hope you are coming awake and alive within the circumstances of your life. And even if you're not, those too are the circumstances of your life. So live your ignorance with complete present moment awareness. That's what my teacher used to say. If you're going to be an idiot, be an idiot. Don't do it half-assed. In any event, you can also support this channel by going to PayPal. There's a PayPal link in the video description below. Otherwise, friends, thanks for joining me. Have a great life. I'm going to America. I hope my plane doesn't crash in the ocean. But I'll see you next time. Maybe I'll shoot a video from America. And yeah, okay. Ciao.